Let's look at the 4 tax reform bills signed into law last week by the Nigerian president. Has been receiving reviews by economists, tax consultants and advisors, professional institutes and others. The new tax laws, which results from the Taiwo Oyedele's Presidential Tax Reform Committee, looks to set a new horizon for Nigeria's economy through reforms that is expected to reform the country's tax administration. But what is the expected impact of the Tinubu's tax reforms now in motion on the markets, which include listed companies and others, when the regime of the new tax takes effect from January the 1st, 2026? Let's bring on my guest for the conversation. Johnson Chukwu is a licensed market professional and the group CEO at Cowrie Asset Management. Good evening to you. It's good to see you in the new month. Thank you for making the time tonight. Give me your first word on the newly signed tax reform bills by Mr. President.
Good evening, Boston, and thank you for having me. My first word is that the 4 new tax laws will help us harmonize the tax system, make compliance easier, and obviously increase the tax to GDP revenue and make more revenues available to the government, to the 3 tiers of government.
Oh, great. That sounds very good. But do you think that the 4 tax bills signed into law represent your own expectations of what the deliverables or the outcome of the Taiwo Oyedele's tax committee would be or should be? Was that your expectation?
Yes, I think to a reasonable extent, one would say that despite the pushbacks, they still ended up achieving substantial gains. Of course, there are still some aspects of the intended act that we are that couldn't see the light of the day. We can say substantially, they achieved a substantial part of what they set out to achieve. 1, harmonizing the tax system. 2, reducing the tax burden on the most vulnerable in the society, increasing the tax coverage, as well as ensuring that the tax is more progressive.
Okay, so what do you think the horizon, therefore, looks like in terms of the expected actual implementation of these 4 tax laws?
Come again, you say, what is that for?
You're just asking what do you think the horizon in terms of, well, it's going to be implemented effective from January the 1st, 2026. The government says they want 6 months for everyone to get used to what the new laws is all about. Look at it, prepare companies and everyone and the agencies involved to get ready. What do you think this actual implementation will look like starting from next year, these 4 tax laws?
Well, I think, Bosen, we should expect a reasonable level of strong implementation. The reason is that the new tax law has actually put a lot of preference or a lot of dependence on digitization. There's tax identification number, where we're going to have a harmonized tax identification number system and that tax identification cards. And then you also have a situation where the most vulnerable are going to be completely taken out of the tax burden, those earning 80,000 naira and below. Then also the value-added tax has been, there's value-added tax exemption for some of the most essential food items, medical, educational items. This will ensure that we have a lot more disposable income to the vulnerable, because these are expenditure that are very critical to the most vulnerable in the society. So I think we're also going to see a lot more compliance, voluntary compliance to the tax law, which will ensure that we have higher level of revenue. The government has set out to achieve a tax to GDP ratio of 18% from the current, I think the last reported figure was about 10.86%. That could be a tall order. It may be attained later than the set time of 2027. But I think in time when it's fully implemented come January 2026, we should see a lot of improvement in our tax administration, tax collection, tax revenue, and voluntary compliance.
Well, so in a manner of speaking, do you think that next year, 2026, will be a transition in a manner of speaking. And that's why I'm asking whether this tax laws is the silver bullet for the economy, or they think there should be more reinforcing actions that the government should put in place to actually ensure that by January the 1st, everyone is in place and everything is also in place to hit the ground running in a manner of speaking.
Yes, I think it started from the fact that they deferred the implementation to January 1st, 2026, simply means they had to make provision for a transition period. The transition period will mean that the government will begin to put the structures in place for that transition. Take, for instance, the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Act, where the Nigerian Revenue Service is going to take up the administration of all revenues accruable to Federation accounts. Remember that currently we have multiplicity of taxes, multiplicity of revenue collecting agencies. That the transition period between now and January will help the Nigerian Revenue Service to be established, to take over in a structured manner the tax or the revenue collection of those agencies. But in terms of silver bullet, there's never a silver bullet when it comes to economic management. What we're trying to do is continue to improve the system, continue to improve the fiscal framework of the country. Of course, tax about the fiscal framework of the country, improve government revenue, minimize tax, not, of course, even tax avoidance. They also said you have to report that, but minimize tax evasion and ensure that where the people fall short of the law, they are sanctioned. Elsewhere in the world, they say two things are only certain: debt and tax. So I think from next year, we're going to see a much more improved tax administration system, but it's not a silver bullet. It's one of those building blocks. I repeat, one of those building blocks we need to build a robust economic system.
Okay, so let's begin to harvest your thoughts as a market professional in relation to these new tax laws. Do you think it will stimulate increased financial asset investments by retail investors? Do you think it will stimulate more companies looking to list on the market, because the threshold, for example, for SMEs have been raised from 25 million to 50 million? Do you think more money will be coming your way, the way of the marketplace?
Yes, Boston, bear in mind that what the Tax Reform Acts had set out to achieve is that they do not tax the seed, but they tax the fruit of economic activities. Unlike where we had in the past, where sometimes the tax is focused on the input that is used to generate revenue. Now, what you are going to be doing taxing is the residual income, which is, first of all, the profit, and two, the consumption. And of course, we know consumption tax is more difficult to avoid. But a couple of things that you have to take away from these tax acts is that, one, the disposable income of the most vulnerable will improve, because they are not going to pay value-added tax on some of their basic consumables, some of those things that account for the largest portion of their household expenditure. So that will mean they have more disposable income to invest in securities for their future. For their future. Again, the fact that small and medium scale enterprises with revenues of below 50 million will be exempted. 50 million will be exempted from taxes. Will also mean that it gives these startups or small enterprises headroom or breathing space to grow. And it's only when they grow, of course, as they grow, they will be in a position to get listed. It becomes easier for them to comply with the listing requirement, both pre and post listing requirement. And it will also help them to reinvest their earnings as to become bigger and grow to the level of need for them to list. So these factors, one, disposable income, which will make it attractive for retail investors to improve on their participation in the market. And remember that the more you have retail participants in your market, the more stable that market is, the more buoyant the market is. It becomes less vulnerable to market directions and market crash, because the retail investors do not easily run away. And again, like I mentioned, business operators, the medium-scale businesses who are now exempted from corporate tax, will also have the headroom to grow and become bigger. And that will improve the number of companies that are listed on the exchange.
Yeah, so those are some of the intentions of the new tax regime. Do you also see some headroom for savings?
Yeah, looking at the corporate tax, for instance, of course, the corporate tax will be reduced to 27.5% next year, 2026. And from 2027, it will further be reduced to 25%. And then that will mean that we're pulling back from the current corporate income tax of 30% plus 4%. And then the 4%, which education tax and which other tax, no time about the rest, has been consolidated a single tax of 4%. And by 2030, that 4% tax will reduce to 2%. Of course, any saving in tax rate, effective tax rate, will mean that companies will have more income to plow back, because what they tax is their residual profit before tax. We have more disposable, more retained earnings to plow back into investment. Will also enable them to pay better dividend, which will further attract investors into investing in their equities and other security instruments. And again, the improved dividend payment or payments to shareholders in terms of returns to shareholders will further also increase the shareholders' ability to invest, reinvest in the companies or invest in new other companies. So this is like a cycle. And once you have a lower tax burden on corporates, then the corporates will have more liquidity, more free cash flow to make investment and to pay to their shareholders, who will in turn have more incentive to invest further. So ultimately, this is expected to increase investment in the economy. But also bear in mind that the new tax law has also introduced what they call a minimum effective tax rate for multinationals of 15%, which is in tandem with global practices. And it will also encourage multinationals to consider us as tax-friendly economic environment for investment purposes.
Okay, well said. So broadly speaking, from next year, January, sort of, you expect to see the books, at least from 2027, sort of, or by the second half of next year, to see the books of quoted companies or listed companies begin to reflect some of this tax reform. How soon do you think the numbers will begin to show up on the books of the companies, or when they have the annual meetings of 2026, this will begin to show up at those meetings?
No, Boston, it won't show up in 2026 annual reports. 2025 annual report. You're going to see up 2026 annual report, which will be available in 2027. Remember that under the corporate tax practice is what we call preceding year basis. So the taxes that will be affected from 2026 year will be 2025 financial reports. But bear in mind that the tax rate, the new tax law is effective from January 2026. So the first impact will be 2026 financial year results, which will be in 2027, which will be presented 2027 because of the preceding year basis on which taxes are computed and paid by corporate organizations.
Okay, that'll be very interesting. But before those reports do come out, we'll see how the markets begin to shape up and see further flows into the market just as soon as we begin to see how these tax reforms begin to crystallize. Thank you so much. We'll keep in touch with you as always on bringing the market insight into key macroeconomic issues such as the new tax reforms. Thank you so much, Johnson Chukwu, the Group CEO at Carrier Asset Management. We wish you all the best and have a great evening.